Okay, good afternoon. Participants are entering our Zoom room gradually, so welcome, good afternoon from Brussels. Welcome to our webinar on small modular reactors hosted by Heinrich-Böll-Stiftung, a German green political foundation. Today we will look into small modular reactors, potentials and risks. Next week, as you might know, the European Commission here in Brussels is going to publish its first small modular reactor strategy for this technology. It's the first time. Next week is also the 15th anniversary of the Fukushima nuclear accident in Japan. And for those who are maybe more middle-aged, you might remember we are almost exactly 40 years from the Chernobyl catastrophe in what is now Ukraine. So the risks of nuclear technology are quite present. As Heinrich-Böll Foundation, we have monitored this technology during the past years with our World Nuclear Industry Status Report. But today, in this roughly 1 hour, we will focus on a new concept that is emerging during the past few years. Smaller reactors. Does this really mean smaller risks, smaller costs, also smaller regulation? Question mark. We will today first hear some findings from a new brief that has just been published by Technical University of Berlin. Alexander James Wimmers will take us through the key findings on the technological, economic, and on the political challenges of this new technology, of these concepts for SMRs. And we will then discuss with two additional experts these findings. It's not a European or only German topic. It's a global and also North American topic. We have also an expert, Alison McFarlane, director of the School of Public Policy and Global Affairs at the University of British Columbia. She's the former chair of the US Nuclear Regulatory Commission. And we also have from Germany, later to discuss these topics, a safety expert, Mareike Rüffer. She's the head of Department for Nuclear Safety at the German Federal Office for the Safety of Nuclear Waste Management. You also are invited to share your views and to ask questions. We have this Q&A box. Please write down your questions and we will try and pick some of them and discuss them with the participants at the end of this webinar. The webinar is recorded. You can also find it later on our YouTube channel, and the publication, you can see it here on the slide. You can download it. It has been just published today on our website. Without any further ado, I hand over to Alexander James Wimmers from Technical University of Berlin. He's a postdoc researcher, research affiliate associate there, and an expert in nuclear energy. Please, your findings in roughly 10 minutes. Over to you.
Thank you, Jörg. And thank you for the opportunity to present our very short brief, our short policy brief, even more dense in the next few minutes. This policy brief was written by Björn Steigerwald and Christian von Hirschhausen and myself. And in it, we summarize most of the, or a lot of the work that we've been doing at our chair, and then obviously other work of other scholars as well. Next slide, please. So to begin this webinar, I'd like to put the current plans of the recently published Nuclear Illustrative Program into perspective to the historic capacity development in the European Union. On the left side, you can see the historic development, and you will notice that we, as of 2025, operate about 86 gigawatts of nuclear capacity in the European Union. And the most recent program or projection assumes a base case, so a low case for nuclear power by 2050, which would add an additional 40 gigawatts of capacity, or plus 46%, or in a extended lifetime operation for the aging plants, and a so-called boosted SMR expansion of an additional 110 gigawatts, adding over 128% of already installed capacity. These projections are really, really ambitious, especially given aging nuclear fleets in the European Union. And as you will see later, the current low development stage of small modular reactors. Next slide, please. So if these capacity expansions were to be achieved by some part with small modular reactors, we would have to ensure that these reactors are safe to operate and therefore licensed to operate in the European Union. Now, as of today, there is no SMR concept that has a license in a European country. There are individual projects that have ongoing licensing procedures. Most of these projects or licensing procedures are happening in the United Kingdom, which is obviously not in the European Union. But here, many projects are undergoing steps in the generic design assessment of the ONR. Here, the Rolls-Royce SMR is the most advanced, and also note that the Rolls-Royce SMR exceeds the usually arbitrary boundary of SMRs of 300 megawatts, as it is a reactor that is designed to operate at 470 megawatts. In Romania, we have the project for the NuScale Voyager, which in February 2025 received a final investment decision, but this design is also not licensed yet. So because most of these projects are uncertain, we have no idea how long the construction times will be once they are licensed. And once a reactor is theoretically licensed by a nuclear regulator, you will then need additional site licensing steps, environmental procedures, and so on. And so we will probably not see additional or first nuclear SMR projects in the European Union within this decade. Next slide, please. So the main challenge with SMRs is that this term comprises a large group of reactor designs and concepts of different operational modes, so light water and non-light water reactors, and then, as I briefly mentioned, different sizes as well. The usual arbitrary limit of a reactor to be classified as an SMR is 300 megawatts of electrical capacity, but then we see reactors such as the Rolls-Royce SMR that are far larger. It's also currently, given the non-existence of any operational experience, challenging to make any general safety assessments regarding the operation of SMRs. And we assume, or we probably know, that the advanced reactor types based on non-light water reactors will require specialized fuel and therefore additional waste management infrastructure, and could potentially raise questions of proliferation. The idea or the economic case that is often made for SMRs is that of mass production, and therefore the reduction of costs per unit. As of now, these assumptions are also unproven and remain highly questionable. And as you can see on the left slide, current projections show that SMRs will be far more expensive per produced unit of electricity than their high-capacity light water reactors, or than renewables. So in general, we can say that the economic prospects and also the feasibility of SMRs in future energy systems, especially in Europe, is highly uncertain. Next slide, please. So the key takeaways of our policy brief are that SMRs are unlikely to provide a meaningful contribution to the European energy system within a relevant time frame. We all remember that we want to decarbonize by the year 2050, and given some licensing and construction lead times and the rather small capacity of SMR projects, we would need to start building many of them now to have for them to have a relevant impact in the coming years. We find that SMRs are an attempt of an industry that is currently in decline to remain somewhat relevant through a hype on and the motivations of SMRs, citing their positive or assumed positive attributes, but neglecting all of the open challenges. It is also worth mentioning that SMRs are not small. 300 megawatts are still imply large infrastructure, and SMRs, or the SMR term, comprises a heterogeneous group of reactors. So this would require specialized infrastructure and specialized regulation. The economic case for SMRs, as we find, is based on hopeful projections and extremely optimistic assumptions. This is something that we also see for high-capacity light water reactors. But in the case of SMRs, this whole case is entirely unproven. We find that instead of focusing on SMRs, EU policymakers should instead prioritize policy frameworks that accelerate the deployment of mature, available, and cost-effective low-carbon technologies, such as renewables in combination with battery storage. Next slide, please. That's it from my side. I hope I remained within my allotted time. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Alexander. You just mentioned we should rather focus on solar, on wind, on batteries, those major technologies. You also mentioned economies of scale as being the crucial element for bringing down the costs. Let me challenge a bit this idea. I mean, when I started a bit more than 20 years ago working in the solar industry, in this industry, you saw the economies of scale starting slowly, costs were going down, and during just a few decades, it became one of the cheapest electricity generation technology, almost a bulk commodity today. If you look at solar panels, couldn't it also happen with small modular reactors? Is this analogy correct? I mean, if they manage and if we are a bit more positive, why not? Also, could there be these learning curves, economies of scale, bringing down the costs?
First of all, point on terminology. Economies of scale also refer to the increasing size of infrastructure projects that then bring down the costs per unit, so costs per megawatt, which is the reason why these economies of scale, so assuming building larger plants will bring down the costs down per unit, and this happened for the high capacity light water reactors, and this is why nuclear power plants have been getting bigger and bigger over the last decades. To answer your question, in theory, we might see these cost reductions through the economies of multiples, so repetition and learning. In theory, this can happen, such as we saw for solar PV, for wind onshore plants, and so on. But it's highly unlikely because this implies that we have technologies that are simple and scalable and that are actually mass produced, right? So assuming that you would have a factory that produces hundreds of reactors per year is, as of today, highly unlikely, especially because we have many different vendors all following a different design approach. So from a theoretical perspective, you could be hopeful, and say it might come at some point, but these assumptions have been around for the last decades, or at least for SMRs for at least a decade. And so far, we haven't even seen a single reactor on the ground. So I would say we can wait until one of these reactors is on the ground, and then we can see if we might want to reduce the costs. But as of today, if we want to actually decarbonize, we should emphasize technologies that are available and cheap today.
Okay, point. In a nutshell, maybe very briefly in one sentence, what is then really the innovative new thing comparing the existing commercial nuclear reactors in the European Union with these new concepts for SMRs, which are not that small when we're talking about 300 to 500 megawatt?
Well, the idea is to build these reactors in with modules. So build the individual components at factories, and then combine them to a finished power plant on site. Again, this might work at some point, but we haven't seen this yet. So all of these claims remain unproven. The technologies themselves are mainly based on existing light water designs. There are some innovative safety improvements. I'm sure Alison will talk about that in a second. But the non-light water reactors, so the so-called advanced generation 4 reactors, of which some are also comprised in the SMR definition, are all based on old reactor designs, quote unquote old, from the 1960s. And these designs have been around and have so far not worked. Perhaps they will at some point, but it's just extremely unlikely that we will see these.
Okay, so maybe not that much under the sun, nothing new under the sun. Um, a lot depends probably from regulation. And as I mentioned, it's not only an EU debate, obviously, it started probably rather really across the pond in North America. There are also some startups, some companies, promoters of this technology. That's why we are happy to have here Alison McFarlane. She's the director currently of the School of Public Policy and Global Affairs at the University of British Columbia on the Pacific coast of Canada. So good morning to you, Alison. You have been for a while the chair of the Nuclear Regulatory Commission in the United States. Just tell us, how did you perceive the emergence of these SMR concepts, and tell us how this will work from a regulatory perspective. There are a lot of things that are not yet clear that have to be double-checked and green-lighted. And I know we have here in Europe some engineers who are critical, who say these are just PowerPoint reactors because they are glossy concepts, nothing more. How do we get from PowerPoint to power production?
Well, it's not a straightforward path. And there's been a lot of breathless excitement about these reactors for 10 years. I mean, it's really ramping up. The hype is ramping up in the media now. But as Alex pointed out, they, for the most part, don't exist. And I think that's one of the main important takeaways here. And and it's not easy. In English, we have a saying about it's rocket science or it's not rocket science. In this case, it is rocket science. It's difficult. And when you engineer a complex technology, you design it on your computer, and then you have to build a scale model to demonstrate that it actually works. We're beginning to be at the point with a few of these in North America, two really. One just got approval to begin construction today, um, of the building them to demonstrate them. So none of these designs in North America, Europe, Japan, Korea, all of that part of the world have actually been demonstrated to work. So as Alex was saying, we really, the uncertainty around how safe they will be, how well they will operate, and how much they will cost is very high. Once you have your demonstration plant, then you have to scale up to full scale, to commercial scale, and that's a whole nother step. All of that is very time consuming and it is very costly.
Yeah, we just heard from Alexander that a lot depends on mass production. The issue is probably that those SMR concepts, they are quite heterogeneous. As Alexander also stressed, there are different concepts from different angles, different technology approaches. You need to build up then, of course, your nuclear fuel supply. You need to, organize transports. You need to think one day also about treating the nuclear waste. This is all a lot of regulatory work, I guess. How do you tackle this in the US? You are not in the regulatory commission anymore in the US, but I think I heard there is now this trend to raise chainsaws against bureaucracy, not only in the US, but reducing bureaucracy is quite a trending topic. How do you deal with this challenge? How do you see the way how nuclear technology and these new concepts could be regulated? Because smaller modular reactors also somehow suggest that if it's modular, if it's somehow mass production, if it's standardized, you might not need those very lengthy permitting processes that we see also in Europe, obviously.
So let me make 2 points. And I don't know what's going on with the US regulator right now. Honestly, it's kind of chaotic. But the US regulator is no longer independent, and it is absolutely essential for countries to have an independent nuclear regulator that is free from industry and political influence. Otherwise, their national security is at risk. That is the reason that the Fukushima accident happened. That is what the Japanese Diet found after the accident, that without an independent regulator, they found that there was collusion among the government, the industry, and the regulator. And that led to a massive accident. So that puts your whole country at risk. You need an independent regulator. What I can tell you about the permitting process and any lengthy permitting processes is that it largely has to do with the applicant. Okay? It is about the quality of the application and the ability of the applicant to field questions that are asked about the application in a timely and high quality manner. And when you have an applicant that is good, the permitting process goes quickly. And we saw that in the US with the Kairos's Hermes reactor. They went through the permitting process in 2 years. And the alternative is Oklo, which picked the wrong permitting process, put in a poor quality application, and was rejected. So it's really about the applicant.
Yeah, I was asking this also from an EU perspective. Obviously, we have here in Brussels a discussion about simplification. There is a lot of momentum, rightly, to cut red tape, to reduce administrative burden. We went through this process during the past years to simplify the authorization, the permitting for renewable energy installations, for storage, now also for grids to accelerate the energy transition. With nuclear technology, this is maybe another story, as there are quite relevant risks. And also from the perspective of the promoters, of the operators, of the startups, a decent regulator, a decent regulatory process and overview might also help to mature this technology if you want to bring it one day really on the market. I don't know how you discuss this in the US, or what is your take on this idea? Comparing it also a bit with the European approach. There will be smart modular reactor strategy next week. The European Commission, in a leak that has been circulated, it suggests to streamline, I quote, streamline regulatory processes and support collaborative approach amongst regulatory authorities across Europe to enable timely SMR license, so speeding up permitting. What is your take on this?
I think that again, it's not about speeding up permitting. This is where I would say folks in government and policymakers are listening only to vendors trying to sell concepts. And it's not clear to me that some of these vendors have actually a lot of experience in the real nuclear industry, in at reactors that are actually putting electricity on the grid. Those people know how difficult it is. Uh, And those people know that it's really important that there not be an accident. Because if there is an accident anywhere, there's an accident everywhere. And they will be affected and shut down. And so I would urge a lot of caution in this effort to streamline permitting because again, it is really about the quality of the application and the ability of the applicant to get something through. In terms of a fleet approach, um, you could take up an approach that similar to what the US has developed. They have two permitting pathways, one where you first get a construction license and then a license to operate, so you don't have to have your design finished. I think that's standard practice in Europe. But there's another approach where you get your design certified and then you just have one license application for construction and operation. But that means you have to have your design really well done to begin with. So that's a different approach.
Yeah, it looks a bit like there is a different culture also in these maybe different nuclear industries. We know from Europe, the big national utilities, often monopolists that have been very familiar with this technology in some member states over decades. And now it looks like there is a new wave of, rather they look like startups. They are not necessarily maybe that much linked to the traditional utilities or partly. With the startup philosophy, it's the idea to break things, to be disruptive, which is maybe not the best safety philosophy. Correct me if I'm wrong, or what is your impression when you look a bit deeper into this community that and this push, this in the brief that has been published by Technical University of Berlin, it's called a hype. Do you agree with this? What is your observation from the US perspective?
Yeah, my observation is there are two nuclear industries. There's the real nuclear industry, which operates reactors, or in the case of Germany, did operate reactors, and they know how difficult it is. And you will often not find many of them really throwing their lot in with the what I call nuke bros. They're like the tech bros. Um, and so a lot of these startup companies, I encourage you just to look on their websites and look at their staff to see who works for them. But you won't find a lot of people with a lot of deep experience in the real nuclear industry. And so they don't understand the challenges associated with bringing these plants online. Um, and it takes a really long time to design a reactor, to work on it, to put an application together. This is something that will take over 10 years. And then actually demonstrating it, because you have to make sure the thing works first. You are, as Alex said, decades away from any kind of commercialization.
Okay. When it comes to the introduction of this technology, we just saw also in a new proposal from the European Commission in the Industrial Accelerator Act, the idea to promote domestic production manufacturing of these reactors or of components of these reactors in the EU. Not surprisingly, during the past years, since the full-scale invasion of Ukraine in the EU, we have discussed a lot how to become more independent, how to reduce dependencies. Would you, and this is a question maybe also going to Alexander, would you expect that these small modular reactors somehow reduce Europe's dependency? I mean, for the conventional reactors, the European pressurized reactors, the EPRs that we saw, the few projects going online during the past years that took 3 times longer and yeah, costs also 3 times more than expected initially. There you partially had to import core elements of those reactors to the EU. They were not all manufactured here. Could there be the made in EU SMR maybe one day, or is this a young, very globalized potential business if it ever becomes reality? What do you think, Alexandra and Alison?
Well, I think that many supply chains are globalized now, and you can't escape that. Um, that being said, I'm sure you could put more manufacturing of different parts of the supply chain into Europe if you wanted. But this is all a huge investment in something that is going to produce electricity at a much higher cost than a large light water reactor and a much higher cost than uh, utility scale solar PV, then wind, and then natural gas. So it depends on what matters to you. I mean, if you don't mind paying extremely high costs for electricity, great.
I mean, it was part of the Affordable Energy Action Plan, this SMR strategy, just as a reminder. You can wonder why it was placed in this plan 1 year ago for our industry. Alexander, your take on this briefly, maybe?
Pretty similar to be honest. I mean, we only have to, if we take a look at the figure that I showed with the ongoing licensing procedures, we see that 4 of the 6 reactors or projects or concepts that we have there are US designs, right? And currently we have a US administration that is not particularly reliable. And this is probably something worth considering as well. We have the UK's Rolls-Royce project, which will probably be the most expensive project they have ever built. If we think of Hinkley Point and Sizewell that are currently ongoing or in planning with astronomical costs. So we'll see that how that develops. I don't know. And then we have the French Nuart project, which is in the so-called joint early review, a non-binding consulting process with different regulators in Europe. And they last year decided to redesign their whole reactor. So they need to restart the whole design process, which will then obviously take another 5 to 10 years until we have a PowerPoint slide, and then we move on to the actual reactor. And yeah, I think as Alison said, if there is proper ambition and money, and there's no limits to funding, we can pull it off. But we live in the real world, and there are limits to funding. And there are more efficient ways to provide electricity. It's about, in this discussion, we're talking about electricity, and if we want to provide electricity, we can do it much cheaper, faster, and easier.
Yeah. One very last question also to build the bridge to our last speaker regarding safety issues. There is another geopolitical issue that is linked with the very concrete safety questions, that is the nuclear proliferation. If I imagine there should be hundreds or even thousands of these small modular reactors installed across the entire continent in Europe and elsewhere, maybe it's a silly question, but doesn't this also just increase, as a matter of fact, the risk that somebody, non-state actors, terrorist groups, whoever, might have access, or a higher probability that they someday might get access? Or am I just a bit in a James Bond movie scenario with this idea? correct me if I'm wrong. Let me know what you think about this.
Get access to the fuel. No, we're all muted.
Yeah, what do you think there are these HALEU concepts, high assay, low enriched uranium? Does this increase the proliferation risk,
Yes.
from technology perspective? And
Yes, it does. There have been a few papers out recently talking about the proliferation risks of high assay, low enriched uranium fuel. You can make a bomb with it, and so it is a risk. And it would have to be controlled a lot more stringently than regular light water reactor fuel. And on the back end, some of the exotic designs, the sodium-cooled fast reactor or the lead-cooled or some of these other designs, the spent fuel is not going to be stable and it is not appropriate to put in a repository. So you would need to process it and then you may be extracting plutonium, and that will also be another proliferation risk.
which requires more oversight and additional regulatory.
Absolutely. And cost, don't forget the cost. More oversight equals cost.
Yeah, and we have not talked about the uranium that is not growing on the trees in Europe. Really, we import almost half of it, as far as I understood, still from Russia or its allies, Kazakhstan and so on, which is also, of course, not necessarily a dependency that is being reduced with SMRs on the short term.
Yeah.
Looking to the safety questions, we have another expert. I invite Mareike Rüffer to come online. She is the head of the Department for Nuclear Safety at the German Federal Office for the Safety of Nuclear Waste Management, with a nice acronym BASE, B-A-S-E. So first of all, it might be a bit surprising because Germany decided to phase out nuclear energy. There is, of course, still a nuclear industry in Germany, and there is, of course, nuclear waste that needs to be treated and stored in a safe way. So I guess you are not out of work when we know that there is legally no way currently to build SMRs in Germany. But maybe introduce to us what is your agency, your office doing, and the link to your research also on SMRs, please.
Yes, thank you. Good afternoon, everybody. I'm happy to be here with you today. And as was introduced, I'd like to tell you some of the perspective of BASE into the subject. And we have already heard it's a very complex subject with a lot of aspects to consider and that play into it. So least to mention the economic side, the arguments of security of energy supply, of course, regulation and the risks of nuclear power and protection of the public. And it's important to stress that every state is free to decide for itself whether they want to use nuclear as a source of energy or not. And it is also regulated on a state level, even here in the EU. Just to give you a brief overview, in the EU we have 27 member states, of which currently 13 use nuclear energy, and their reasoning to do or not to do so is as diverse as well as their experiences with nuclear power over the past decades. So my organization, BASE, is a German regulator for transport of radioactive material, storage and management of radioactive waste. And we also advise the German Ministry of the Environment on issues of nuclear safety. So I just would like to give you some insights to that. And for further reading, I also would like to point you to a statement that we contributed for the EU consultation process for their initiative SMR Future Development and Use in Europe, as well as studies that we conducted in recent years and that you can find on our website, and also the University of Berlin contributed to them. So being a regulator, I would like to focus on safety aspects, and also try and shed some light on some issues that I think are often a bit underexposed or skipped over when one publicly talks about or reads about SMR. And I have brought 3 thoughts for you that I would like to present. And my first point or my first thought is that it's already been mentioned, safety must not be compromised. While SMR are being advertised as being inherently safe, it is also right to say overall, SMR could potentially offer safety advantages over conventional large nuclear power plants. They have a lower radioactive inventory per reactor, and they aim to achieve a higher level of safety through targeted simplifications and increased use of passive systems. However, on the other hand, various SMR concepts also call for reduced safety requirements. We talked about lowering standards for bureaucracy. For example, there's the call with regard to the degree of redundancy or diversity in their safety systems, and some concepts even call for the abandonment of current requirements. For example, in the area of internal emergency protection or the complete abandonment of external emergency protection planning. But what you have to be aware of is that the safety of a reactor plant depends on all of these factors. So it cannot be stated with the current state of knowledge that SMR concepts will actually fundamentally achieve a higher level of safety. And looking at the requirement side, over the past 20 years, the EU established a comprehensive framework of directives that encompass radiation protection, nuclear safety, and waste management. And these directives lay down requirements and overarching safety objectives for all EU member states. And in the case of the EU Directive for Nuclear Safety, the accident of Fukushima Daiichi, which will be 15 years ago next week, was a turning point. The insights from the accident prompted the EU to push for a revised directive that raised safety levels and safety requirements and contains now a very ambitious safety objective. And this objective basically requires member states to ensure that their nuclear installations are designed, sited, constructed, and operated with the objective of preventing accidents. But now, 15 years on, in 2024, the EU Net Zero Industry Act has classified nuclear energy as a net zero technology, and thereby essentially enabling a possible lower safety standards. So the Net Zero Industry Act enables the introduction of regulatory sandboxes for SMRs, and that means that safety standards could temporarily be relaxed or lowered. And I think, as you all know, Europe is quite densely populated, and accidents spread across boundaries. We have seen that in the past. So I think there are definitely questions that pose itself and that need to be looked at and followed up. The second thought that I would like to introduce is focusing on the life cycle and also really introducing the whole, further thoughts of just operating, having the SMRs there. And that is when developing an SMR industry, you need to look at the full life cycle of that industry, and that includes the back end, and you have to consider that right from the beginning. So the back end means decommissioning, dismantling, interim storage of the fuel and disposal of the high-level radioactive waste. And the entry into the nuclear age some 5 or 6 decades ago started without these back-end considerations, especially when it came to handling the radioactive waste produced. And just to illustrate that, there is no country in the world to date that has an actually up and running repository for radioactive waste. And out of 30 countries that operate more than 400 nuclear power plants worldwide, only one country is actually currently in the process of building a nuclear waste repository. So In Germany, I know we have a unique experience with protests against a potential site for a repository when it comes to the intensity of the debate and the protests. However, our experience is not unique in the fact that local communities are not in consent to accept a repository in their neighborhood, and that means timelines being shifted or the determination of a site is being shifted or postponed. So the problem is not yet solved, but we're going to introduce a new industry with more reactors. And as it has, I think, already been mentioned, there's research that shows that small modular reactors produce more radioactive waste in relation to their size than conventional larger reactors because the fuel burn up is not as efficient. And in addition, the SMR concept, like liquid salt reactors, they produce waste that actually cannot be put into existing final storage concepts and might require completely new disposal methods. So it could be that there is a different long-term safety assessment, interactions of other high-level radioactive waste in the same repository must be ruled out. It could be that even a new repository must be designed. So I think also it has been mentioned, all of these are also cost factors that must not be underestimated, and especially in waste disposal, these are very long-term projects with very long timelines, and it is actually likely that costs also have to be borne by the state or the society rather than operating companies that might not even be in business by the time the waste is buried. So my third point is that I would like to bring to your attention the aspect of the logistic challenges that I think are being underestimated in the current debate about SMR. So the planned decentralized use of SMRs definitely requires either additional local interim storage facilities or a massive increase in transports of radioactive material all across Europe. And some of the concepts, there are so many out there, but the reactor and fuel are planned to be transported to the site and then replaced as a whole. So it will already be in the reactor. And then possibly it has to be transported back with activated irradiated fuel and the SMR fuel core sealed off. And that definitely causes new challenges because that has not been done. And at the moment, with the current regulation, it's very unlikely that such a transport could comply with applicable transport safety regulations and principles. So open questions also include the development of new transport packaging that must shield. So the necessary shielding of the packaging could easily exceed the weight limits that are also applicable for many transport routes. So I don't hear much about that in any discussion so far. So just to sum it up quickly and make a conclusion, I think it's very necessary to look at all of these questions and challenges that are associated with the introduction of a new SMR industry. And many of these questions and many lessons are available from over 50 years of civil nuclear energy employment to date. So I think it is paramount to know about the long-term risks and long-term questions in order to really assess the costs of such an industry and society to the society and just make informed decisions on all levels. Thank you. I excuse for my voice. I'm just recovering from a cold, so it's breaking down a bit.
Thank you. It was very clear that in Europe, it's not a walk in the park introducing this technology. You made that very clear. And even if you might think, well, a packaging of nuclear waste, this is a technical detail. No, we have not yet done our homework in that regard. And these are open questions that the industry will have to answer, where we need a proper independent regulatory oversight, obviously, and we should not compare this technology with established major renewables, where we know how they work, what impacts they have, and where we have accelerated the permitting process for good reasons and with a broader societal consensus, I would say, in Brussels, in the member states. So this is another cup of tea, I would say. That's why a good point that you made. It's maybe questionable how and why it was included into the Net Zero Industry Act, and how we might see also further attempts to simplify, deregulate oversight of this new technology. Time is running. We, of course, also still want to allow participants to ask a few questions. And I see that there are in this Q&A box already a few questions written down. I would maybe just pick those questions and see who wants to answer, who is competent, has the expertise. The first one is from Andrew Warren. He heard that the UK's official national electricity supply operator told the British Parliament that in order to achieve net zero by 2050, it makes sense to do energy efficiency first to bring the numbers down. Surely that is the key priority. Well, I think here in the room, we are all fans of energy savings and the energy efficiency first principle. You could organize another webinar on, is nuclear energy an efficient technology? Anybody who wants to just give a very quick 1, 2 sentences reaction? I think this is less controversial.
Yeah, I think increasing energy efficiency makes absolute sense. But we have to consider that decarbonization involves the increased use of electricity. So for transport, industrial productions, and so on. And that will increase the demand for electricity, and therefore we need additional capacities that are able to produce electricity. So yes, efficiency, but then you need to decarbonize the whole energy system, and therefore you just need additional capacities as well. So both is probably the best way to do it.
Thank you. Then there is a question. I jumped directly to Roger Sputz on how the liability will be regulated for SMRs. Will SMRs fall under international conventions? How will SMR operators deal with security, for example, fuel and plutonium transports? I mean, Mareike already introduced issues with regards to transports and regulation. Do you want to add a bit? I mean, I think it's a very legitimate question. There is very little talk about the waste and the responsibilities of operators. When I look into this leaked SMR strategy, we don't know if it will be published as such next week, but they just promise the minimization, I quote, of high-level radioactive waste in line with circular economy objectives. Sounds nice, but maybe Mareike or Alison, what do you think? What is your answer?
Yeah, I can try and answer. So I think we have international legal instruments for liabilities that will have to be looked at, but I think will apply. So I know that there is still a bit of talk behind the scenes in terms of international conventions, but so far it's like more the question, why would they not fall under it? Because they are nuclear reactors that are land-based in most of the cases. But I think also on the regulatory side, there are still some discussions going on. So when it comes to transport of the fuel, I think I already mentioned that, also the plutonium. Just to say, the transport regulation framework is an international framework that applies worldwide, just to ensure that things can be transported safely between countries. It's not one transport framework for Germany or the EU, but it's like actually to the whole world. So that's the same everywhere. And when you deal with nuclear materials or installations, you always have to have a security concept as well, and that is true for transport as well. So there is the difference between safety and security has to be dealt with too.
Yeah, interesting question. Or yeah, do you want to come?
Yeah, just jump in at the last point that you mentioned, Jörg, which is about the waste, and if the wish is to minimize the waste, I'm sorry to say that it won't happen. I and my team have done some research on this, and what we found is that these new reactors will, if they're light water designs, you may have a similar amount of waste relative to energy produced. If they are some of these using exotic fuels, then the waste problem is exacerbated. It is made worse. So it's the opposite.
Yeah, and so just to add on to that, I think it's also important to stress that the idea of recycling waste kind of implies that, oh wow, then it's gone because we reuse everything. But what you actually do is you separate any leftover fuel from the rods, and you separate it from the already fission products. But these fission products are also waste that you have to deal with. So there is no waste concept out there.
Correct. And reprocessing, as we know, is extremely expensive. The uranium is not reused. The amount of low-level waste is vastly increased, and the proliferation risk goes up a lot. So again, more safeguards measures, this will cost a lot.
Okay, one last question from I see another one, Michele Governatori, who asks, basically saying small reactors have always existed, also in the military sector, extremely isolated power generation, but they did not expand into usual power generation. Are there new current design or tech solutions today that could make the size more viable? I mean, they are not that small, as we learned, compared to conventional reactors. Maybe Alexander, would you like to comment a bit? You already explained what are the trends, what are the sizes, what are the issues.
Well, the size of reactors in the 1950s and 60s was rather small, and then through the economies of scope, because it is more efficient to build larger plants per unit of capacity. As I said, they got larger and larger, and that's how we ended up in with the high capacity reactors for the power production. That then reduced the specific cost of electricity. I assume from what we see that probably the light water SMR concepts will be within the SMR concepts the cheapest, but per unit of produced electricity, they will be even more expensive than the existing high capacity light water reactors. Right, so this is always a relative comparison. The absolute cost for one of these reactors might be lower than the cost for a high capacity reactor such as Hinkley or Flamanville, but per electricity produced, and this is what is the relevant metric, they will be far more expensive. And the other concepts, the other designs, from what we know from past experience with prototypes of fast reactors or high temperature reactors, is that most of these have been abandoned either due to cost or due to safety issues and accidents and so on. So first, you would need to demonstrate that they work, as Alison rightly pointed out, and then you can see what they actually cost. And if the reactor itself is more complicated to operate, it will probably be more costly to operate as well.
Good. It's almost 6. 1 hour is over. I see a few more questions popping up, but being aware of time, I would like to wrap up now with maybe one final question in just one very short sentence answer from the 3 panelists. If you were up to write next week's European Commission SMR strategy, what would you add or remove? Very quickly, 1, 2 words, maybe in a round, starting with Alexander, Alison, Mareike.
To be honest, I don't know. I'd probably scrap the whole document.
Fair to say we don't want any SMR strategy, maybe. Alison, Mareike, any?
Yeah, I would just say that I would have done my homework and a lot of due diligence to understand really what the issues are and not listen to just one side of the story.
Yeah, absolutely. I agree with that. My contribution is just also consider the back end. There's a lot to look at.
Okay. Thank you all for taking the time. It was a very enriching, super interesting exchange. I hope you also enjoyed it. You still, of course, can find the publication on our website. We would also ask the participants to please, after closing this webinar in a few seconds, fill in our evaluation survey. Tell us what you like and what you did not like, or which topics we should cover in one of the following webinars. There will be a link popping up once we close this room. So I just have to thank you all again for being here for next week's small modular reactor strategy. Well, keep tuned in and follow this. I see there is probably a lot of work still to do, and as was mentioned by Mareike, safety must not be compromised. This is maybe also a reminder for those who think we can rush through regulation and scrap it all with a chainsaw and make it all very simple and easy for nuclear technology. Maybe let's take a step back and think about it before. Thanks a lot again. Have a nice evening or a nice day in Canada, and see you soon for the next webinar of Böll Foundation in Brussels. Thank you.
Bye-bye. Thank you.